Hey everyone, my name is Tristan and welcome to my workshop. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make 3 lightsaber hilts out of different materials and using different tools. One is made of cardboard, one out of PVC, and one is all aluminum. I'll show you in detail how to build the first two, and then we'll go over how I built the aluminum one because it requires some pretty expensive tools. Let's start with the cardboard lightsaber. This one costs nearly nothing to make, and there's a good chance you already own most of the materials to make it. Keep in mind that you can make it any way you want, you don't have to follow my process exactly. So let's get right into the build. Before starting a build like this, it's a good idea to draw a blueprint of the result you'd like to achieve. I kept mine pretty simple and clean to make the building process a bit easier. Here's a couple of cardboard rolls and tubes that I kept exactly for a build like this one. I'll start with a thin and long cardboard tube, cut it to length, and build up the details. The middle part of the lightsaber has to be thicker, so I take a bigger tube and cut it to length. Then I slice it along its length, roll it tighter, and tape it shut. Because that tube is too big to fit the thinner one, I cut open a couple more tubes and glue them on to build up the thickness. Finally, I simply slip on the bigger tube over the whole thing. Now for the emitter, I want to use this pen tape roll. To connect it to the hilt, I draw 2 circles on some cardboard, then I add in smaller circles inside and cut everything out. This makes for some good spacers. I simply glue them in the right spot using hot glue. When that's done, I glue on the tape roll, and that looks pretty good to me. Now I'll quickly show you how I made this step down from the thicker part to the thinner one. First, I stick on some pieces of duct tape, stretching them to get some tension. I add 2 layers and reinforce each end. Then I cover everything in masking tape to smooth out the creases. For the back end of the saber, I'll just use 2 plastic caps. I glue a spacer on the bigger one to make it fit the hilt better. Finally, I glue both pieces on to create some kind of pommel. I quickly build this control switch out of cardboard and smooth out the corner with masking tape. Before adding anything else to the saber, I'll paint the pommel with a gold spray paint. Once that's dry, it's time to make that hilt look like metal, and for that I'll use aluminum tape. First, cut it to length, then peel off the backing and carefully stick it on the hilt. Slowly smooth it on, trying not to get any bubbles. After nearly an hour of work, the whole thing got covered in aluminum tape. I'd like to add on some black details, and for that I simply use electrical tape. It's finally time to glue on the control switch to the hilt. At this point the saber looks pretty good, but I want to add more to it. To get more 3D details, I'll use some black 2mm EVA foam. I simply cut it into strips and glue them on with hot glue. I wanted to have some clear buttons on my control box, so I just made some hot glue blobs on a piece of wax paper and let them dry. Gluing them on is pretty simple. And for a final touch, I added a couple of small screws. This lightsaber is way too clean, so let's weather it using oil paints. Acrylics would also work. I use a small paintbrush to get the paint into the corners, and then I wipe off the excess. And that's how you make a lightsaber out of cardboard. Alright, so it's time to make the PVC lightsaber. This one is also really easy to make, and I think it's actually easier to make it look good than the cardboard lightsaber. For this one, you might have to run to the store if you don't already own a selection of PVC pipes. I really wanted to make mine out of things I already had, so you'll see I used a couple other plastic pieces from household objects. So let's build it. Here are all the parts I'll use to build the lightsaber. I didn't draw a blueprint for this one because the design really depended on the pieces I had on hand. I took some time off camera to find all those pieces and make sure they all fit together. The first piece is a cap from a medicine vial, and I think it has a pretty cool looking design. Next one is just a cap from a hairspray can. After that we have a spent tape roll, followed by a thread spool. This is just a straight PVC fitting, and then we have a PVC pipe, and I cut the end on an angle. To fit over the pipe, I cut off parts of two 45 degrees PVC fittings. And finally, we have the cap from a super glue bottle cut in half with the bottom rounded. All the PVC pipe fittings were cut using a hacksaw and cleaned up with a Dremel and sandpaper. To assemble the lightsaber, I'll rough up the pieces with sandpaper and then glue everything with super glue and PVC cement. The assembly process is so rewarding because you get to watch your work go together super quickly and easily. The last piece to glue on is the button. I thought there wasn't enough details, so I added a piece of foam and a hot glue blob to act as a button. To make sure the paint will stick, I rough up the surface using sandpaper. Now it's time for primer, and I made a little handle to hold the saber while painting. Once the primer is dry, it's time for a coat of gunmetal spray paint. And that looks so clean. Also, I found out the thread spool can separate, which will make the next step much easier. Like for the cardboard saber, I'll cover a couple of parts with aluminum tape. I won't show the process because it took me so many tries to get it perfect. The last parts I wanted to paint were the two buttons. I sprayed metallic paint in a small vial and brushed it on using a small paintbrush. And now let's do some weathering using the same oil paint as earlier. Finally, I did some dry brushing with silver acrylic paint. And this is how you make a PVC lightsaber. Now that we built the two easy lightsabers, it's time for the complicated one. This lightsaber hilt is machined from a 2" by 1 foot chunk of aluminum. And to get to this, I turned it on a metal lathe. Now you might be wondering how I got access to that tool and how I learned to use it. Well, I'm currently studying in mechanical engineering, and the school I go to gives the students access to the workshop and the materials to make projects, which I think is really cool. And the metal lathe is the first machine they teach you to use. If you want to get into machining yourself without having to study in engineering, you totally can. You can actually purchase a metal lathe for under $1,000 if you get lucky. Of course, $1,000 for one tool is still really expensive, but if you want to make a lightsaber hilt out of aluminum, there's a cheap alternative. Just go to a hardware store and look for metal sink pipes and fittings. There's a wide selection and you can easily assemble them to make something pretty cool. But if you want to see how I made my lightsaber hilt on a lathe, keep watching. I'll go over the tools and the process to make one, but if you want to see someone actually make one on camera, go watch Adam Savage's video where he makes Luke's lightsaber on a metal lathe. He really goes into details and the video is great. I'll leave a link in the description. But now I'll show you how I made my lightsaber. Here's a picture of the lathe I used, and as you can see it has guards just to make it a bit safer to use. There's three main parts of the lathe that you need to know about: the chuck, the tailstock, and the tool post. Under the tool post there are rails that let you move the cutting tool. The chuck holds and turns the material, the tailstock lets you drill holes and hold the other side of your material when you have a long piece. Then the tool post simply holds the cutting tool. I started with a 2" by 1 foot aluminum rod and started turning it down to the biggest measurement from my drawing. This is a 1:1 scale drawing of the lightsaber I wanted to make. I used it as a reference throughout the whole machining process. The next step was to start cutting the details. To achieve all those different angles, I used different tools and rotated the tool post. The grooves you see here were achieved using a special tool normally used to completely cut off the pieces. At that point, I was getting pretty close to the chuck and just flipped the lightsaber to finish the other end. Unfortunately, I don't have any pictures for the rest of the process, but here is the final result. When I was done, I sanded the whole hilt with 600, 800, 2000 and 3000 grit sandpaper to remove the imperfections. And finally, I buffed it with compound and then polish. And that's how you make an aluminum lightsaber hilt on a metal lathe. As I said earlier, if you want to see the machining process in more detail, just go check out Adam Savage's one-day build of Luke's lightsaber. But without further ado, let's see those finished lightsabers. I really hope this video inspired you to make your own lightsaber no matter how you do it. This video was a lot of work, so I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, consider leaving a like and subscribing to my channel for more cool stuff like this. If you want to see more of what I do, things that don't always make it into my videos, go follow me on Instagram. I post some pretty cool stuff on there. The link will be in the description. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.